Good morning, everyone. Today, I just really wanted to speak to B12. I think it's an important topic that maybe someone new to the plant-based world doesn't quite understand. And maybe those of you who are strictly eating a plant-based diet don't do the due diligence that maybe you should when it comes to this really important nutrient that can be a problem on a plant-based diet. So the reason I wanted to speak to this is I'm doing a workshop all about labs, what labs are needed just in general health, also labs that maybe you should be paying attention to on a plant-based diet and why. And then I'm also offering opportunities for those in the audience to ask questions if they have their own labs available, and we'll do the best I can to provide some guidance. That is found at drmarbus.com, and click up on workshop and you'll see it's essential labs for plant-based eaters. But today I want to speak to B12, and I'm sure many of you have heard that B12 can be found in animal products, but animals don't create it. Plants don't create it. B12 is actually created by bacteria, and we actually do have bacteria in our gut that make B12, but it's beyond the point of absorption, and so that's why it's important that we have dietary sources of B12. And sometimes people go, well, sometimes I take a B12 supplement. Many times I forget, and it may actually be contributing to some symptoms, maybe fatigue or some other things that you just can't quite put your finger on. I had a recent patient who had been plant-based for several years and had not been supplementing and had all the telltale signs of significant B12 deficiency. And within weeks of proper supplementation, he felt amazingly better. So again, some things to just pay attention to, and I'll kind of get to, how much you should be supplementing, what you should be looking at, and why. But if you think about it, dietary sources of B12 come as methylcobalamin and what they call a 5-deoxyadenosylcobalamin. Cobalamin just means B12, and supplements might be like a cyanocobalamin or hydroxycobalamin or methylcobalamin. So you can see a variety of different types of supplementation. I do recommend the cyanocobalamin. I think that is a good, safe, cheap supplement that you can find anywhere. And so you don't have to buy the fancy methylcobalamin. And if you do, you should probably be adding a few other sources. But again, that's not exactly the topic that I want to speak to. But let's talk a little bit about digestion and absorption. And I think the reason B12 is even a big issue for people who don't even eat necessarily a plant-based diet is that we have such a large proportion of Americans who are either pre-diabetic or diabetic and who might be taking certain medications like metformin, which will further decrease the absorption, or you might be taking some proton pump inhibitors or like heartburn medications that are now just readily available over the counter, and those also further decrease the absorption. And as we get older, we have decreased absorption. So if you put all of that together in a menu, it's just setting us up for the perfect storm for B12 deficiency. So if you think about it, we take in B12, and in the stomach, the acid, the hydrochloric acid and pepsin release B12 from the protein. So pepsin is just an enzyme that cuts it. And then the free B12 is then bound by a special group of proteins called R binders. Or haptocorn. It doesn't really matter, but these are produced by the salivary glands and also in your stomach. And what happens is it prevents the acid from degrading the B12. And then, in the duodenum, which is that first part of the small intestine, the B12 is taken up by intrinsic factor. Again, going through some process, intrinsic factor, you can have actually intrinsic factor deficiency and have B12 deficiency just because of that, because intrinsic factor is crucial for the absorption of the B12. So basically what happens is it travels through the gut because the intrinsic factor is also produced by the stomach. Then as it travels through the gut, it's actually absorbed in the last part of the small intestine. So literally your chewing, your digestion, all of this is preparing the B12 to be transported to the end of your small intestine, which is between the stomach and the large intestine, to be absorbed in a very specialized area. So you can see why a few different places can go wrong if you have decreased intrinsic factor if you have medications that are inhibiting maybe the hydrochloric acid from, the breakdown, and a few different things. So just paying attention to medications that you think are over the counter or prescribed. They can have side effects, of course. So you just want to be listening to and asking your doctor if there's any potential things that we need to be checking. So if you're on metformin, I would absolutely check your B12 annually. And as you're a diabetic or if you get older, it's not a bad thing to be checking, even if you're not eating a strictly whole food plant-based diet. So basically, when the B12 is taken up, there's a few things that it does. And it's really important for converting homocysteine to methionine, which is an amino acid. I have a video on homocysteine and go into deep dive into what homocysteine is, but that's really important for DNA synthesis. And the other thing is that it's also important for the conversion of what they call methylmalonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. This is a part of the Krebs cycle. I don't know if any of you ever took any biochemistry or anything, but the Krebs cycle could be a nightmare. The teachers love to give pop quizzes on the Krebs cycle, and just remember lots of discussions about the Krebs cycle. But it's really important for energy production. And then any excess B12 that you might have is actually excreted in the urine. There is some controversy on whether you can have too much B12 in the intake of supplementation. I don't have a good answer on that right now, but I do like to keep B12s in a certain level, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's interesting, there is some reabsorption of B12 as it's recycled, because the body does try to minimize waste. The B12 is actually stored in your liver and can have many years worth of B12 storage. But if you are in a chronic state of deficiency, there's not going to be that B12 being stored up in your liver like it typically would if you had it regular supplementation or fortified foods. So what does it look like when you're deficient? A few different things. Again, the risk for deficiency are if you're a strict plant-based eater and don't have supplementation or fortified foods, malabsorption, even like inflammatory bowel disease can also affect it because you're not going to be absorbing well. Lack of the intrinsic factor, and the medications, like I mentioned specifically, more commonly are metformin and things like proton pump inhibitors or histamine inhibitors, where we're decreasing that hydrochloric acid. And then, of course, sometimes there's an increased need, like during pregnancy. And so you might want to be paying attention to those points as well. So now we know the importance of B12, because B12 deficiency can cause a lot of different symptoms, including things like fatigue, nerve pain, tingling in your legs and your fingers, weakness, memory issues. It can cause anemia, where your red blood cells look very large. So again, just some very important things to be paying attention to. If you're having some unusual symptoms, it's important to ask your doctor if they're not aware that, one, that you're eating a plant-based diet, or that you aren't supplementing with B12. You need to ask them specifically, can you measure my B12? And if they don't, I would ask someone, find another doctor who will, or there may be some blood tests that you can order online or through like Quest or somewhere, some other labs that will do it without a doctor's order. And again, it'll depend on what state you live in, because there's some strict laws around labs being ordered and why, even if you pay for them. So when you do check your B12, what I like to do is I check homocysteine as well. I check the B12, serum B12, and I check methylmalonic acid. Now, the reason I check homocysteine and methylmalonic acid is homocysteine requires B12 and folate to actually be further metabolized. And so what will happen is you'll see homocysteine is elevated in a B12 deficient state. And you want to keep your homocysteine level below 10. Now, if you are seeing that your B12 level is sufficient, and I mean above 500, anywhere between like 500, 1100 or so on a lab test is good. Now you'll see there's a low normal value on B12, probably anywhere between 200, 250 to 1200, 1100 on your blood test. What I've seen over 2 decades of practicing is there are some people who will have symptoms of B12 deficiency in a lower state or in a below 500. So just something to be mindful of. So hence I try to keep people above 500, and I very rarely, I don't even think I've ever seen someone with B12 deficient symptoms above 500. No. So if you're seeing that your homocysteine is elevated and your B12 level is above 500, there's something else going on. But the reason we want to speak to the homocysteine is that an elevated homocysteine can increase risk of cardiac disease, heart disease, stroke, different things like that. And again, I go into that deeper into that other video. Now, the methylmalonic acid is in the same boat as homocysteine. It requires B12 to be further metabolized, and it will be elevated. Some people also ask me, can I have too low of methylmalonic acid? Not that I'm aware of in any research that has shown that it's a problem if it's too low or lower than, quote unquote, the normal reference range. So B12 above 500, try to keep it below 1100, and homocysteine less than 10, methylmalonic acid within the normal range. How much supplementation does that require? Now, you'll hear differing opinions about this, but this is just my anecdotal. There's no, I don't know of any research or having gone into research about why and how much you need. I find that most people, and not all though, some can do like one larger dose a week, but I found those to be rare. Most people require 500 to 1,000 micrograms daily. And that comes in just whatever supplementation form that you like. You can do liquid, you can do dissolvable, you can do the tablet. And I haven't found that too many people, like I said, I'm trying to think of percentage-wise. If I was to give a rough estimate, maybe 5% to 10% can do a larger amount and have a sufficient amount where they're lower risk for some of the symptoms. So that actually might be helpful. So again, this is kind of the information that I'm going to be going over on Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific during the workshop. So bring your questions if you have them. And yeah, so that's about it. I think, it's just an important thing to remind you. If a doctor tells you don't need to supplement B12 on a plant-based diet, I would strongly disagree. Respectfully, strongly disagree. And B12 is the one supplement for me is non-negotiable. There's a few others that I think are like insurance policies, like vitamin D and maybe some algae omega-3s in small amounts. But other than that, most of the time you're fine. But again, these are just some very important things to be mindful of. And you should have your B12 checked annually if you're on metformin. If you're definitely older, I'd say over 65, take anything on a regular basis that decreases hydrochloric acid in your stomach, like heartburn medications, either prescribed or over the counter. And then again, when you get it checked, make sure it's above 500. So hope that was helpful. Would love to know if there's any comments or suggestions or questions that you might have. Please feel free to share this video if you know of anybody plant-based eaters. I think, again, this is an important topic that sometimes is neglected. We're always saying, eat this food, but we never say, oh, take this one supplement. But I do try to be very mindful of patients that this is an important thing to keep in mind as they go about their journey and finding better health on a plant-based diet. So thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you found that helpful. And again, if you'd like to check out the workshop, it's at drmarbus.com. Click under workshop, and I will see you next time. All right, there we go.